The iron chains rattled against the wooden floorboards of the stagecoach as Rebecca Vaughn shifted uncomfortably, her wrists raw from the metal cuffs that bound her. Through the small window, the dusty landscape of the Illinois prairie stretched endlessly as the coach rumbled toward Galesburg toward a man she had never met, but who had paid for her passage, expecting a willing bride, not a prisoner. It was 1871, and the summer heat pressed down mercilessly on the Illinois plains. Rebecca's cotton dress clung to her skin with sweat and grime from 3 days of travel. Her long auburn hair, once neatly pinned, now hung in limp strands around her face. At 22, she had imagined many futures for herself, but none like this sold by her uncle to settle a gambling debt, transported across states to marry a stranger. "Almost there, miss," the driver called back, his voice barely audible over the thundering hooves and creaking wood. "Your intended's waiting at Fuller's General Store." Rebecca closed her eyes, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. She had learned early in life that crying solved nothing. Not when her parents died of fever 6 years ago, not when her uncle took control of her modest inheritance, and certainly not now. The stagecoach slowed as it entered Galesburg. Through the window, Rebecca caught glimpses of a typical frontier town. Wooden buildings lining a wide main street, horses hitched to posts, men in dusty clothes moving with purpose, women with baskets and children in tow. Ordinary life continuing while hers had been shattered. When the coach finally stopped, Rebecca heard voices outside the driver speaking to someone, explaining something in hushed tones. Then the door swung open, and sunlight flooded the small space. A tall figure blocked the light. As her eyes adjusted, Rebecca saw a man with broad shoulders, sun-weathered skin, and penetrating blue eyes beneath the brim of a well-worn hat. His expression shifted from expectation to shock as his gaze fell on her chains. "What in God's name?" he muttered, his deep voice carrying a note of disbelief. The driver shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Oldham, this here's your mail-order bride from Boston. Her uncle arranged everything." Nathan Oldham's face darkened as he took in Rebecca's disheveled appearance and the iron restraints. Without hesitation, he reached into his boot and pulled out a small tool. In 3 quick motions, he broke the lock on her chains, the metal falling away with a clatter. "You're free now," he said simply, offering his hand to help her down from the coach. Rebecca stared at him, then at her freed wrists, unable to comprehend this sudden turn of events. Freedom had seemed so distant just moments ago. Cautiously, she placed her hand in his, feeling the strength and calluses of a working man as he helped her down to the dusty street. "I didn't order a prisoner," Nathan said flatly to the driver, who was now fidgeting with the reins. "I paid for a willing bride's passage. Just delivering what I was given, Mr. Oldham," the driver replied defensively. "Her uncle paid extra to make sure she arrived. Said she had cold feet about the wedding." Rebecca found her voice at last. "My uncle is a liar and a thief," she said, her tone sharper than she intended. "He arranged this marriage to settle a gambling debt after stealing my inheritance." Nathan's jaw tightened, and he turned to face her fully. "Miss Vaughn, is it?" When she nodded, he continued, "I'm Nathan Oldham. I own a cattle ranch outside of town. I advertised for a wife, yes, but I've no interest in forcing anyone into marriage." A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the unusual sight of a chained woman arriving on the stagecoach. Rebecca felt their stares like physical touches, her cheeks burning with humiliation. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private," Nathan suggested, noticing her discomfort. He turned to address the onlookers. "Nothing to see here, folks, just a misunderstanding." As the crowd reluctantly dispersed, Nathan picked up Rebecca's small trunk from the coach. "Mrs. Hollister runs a boarding house just down the street. We can talk there." Rebecca followed him, her legs unsteady after days confined in the coach. The chains may have been removed, but the weight of her situation remained. She had arrived in a strange town with no money, no connections, and no way to return to Boston, not that there was anything left for her there. Mrs. Hollister's boarding house was a 2-story white clapboard building with green shutters. Inside, it smelled of baked bread and coffee. The proprietress, A plump woman with kind eyes and gray streaked hair looked up from her ledger as they entered. Nathan Oldham. "I thought today was the day your bride was due," she said cheerfully before her gaze settled on Rebecca. Her expression shifted to concern. "Oh, my dear, you look exhausted." "Mrs. Hollister, this is Miss Rebecca Vaughn," Nathan said. "There's been a complication with the arrangement. She'll need a room for now." The older woman's eyes moved to Rebecca's wrists, where angry red marks remained from the chains. Her lips tightened, but she asked no questions. "Of course, I've got a room ready upstairs. Come along, dear." Rebecca hesitated, looking at Nathan. Despite everything, he was still a stranger, and she had learned the hard way not to trust easily. "What happens now?" Nathan removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair streaked with sun-bleached strands. "That's for you to decide, Miss Vaughn. The arrangement I made was for a willing bride. Since that's not the case, you're under no obligation to me." "I have no money," Rebecca admitted, hating the tremor in her voice. "My uncle took everything." "Then consider your room and board paid for the next 2 weeks," Nathan said firmly. "That should give you time to decide what you want to do next." Relief and suspicion warred within Rebecca. "Why would you do that for me?" Nathan's expression softened slightly. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because I bear some responsibility, I didn't look closely enough at who I was dealing with." Mrs. Hollister cleared her throat. "Let's get you settled first, Miss Vaughn. You look dead on your feet. There'll be time for decisions after you've rested and had a proper meal." Rebecca nodded gratefully, suddenly aware of her bone-deep exhaustion. As she followed Mrs. Hollister toward the stairs, she glanced back at Nathan, who stood watching her with an unreadable expression. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded once, placed his hat back on his head, and turned to leave. "I'll check on you tomorrow, Miss Vaughn. Rest well." After he left, Mrs. Hollister showed Rebecca to a small but clean room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. "The bathroom's at the end of the hall. Dinner's at 6, but I'll have a tray sent up if you'd prefer to eat alone tonight." "Thank you," Rebecca said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I would prefer that." When Mrs. Hollister left, Rebecca sank onto the bed, the emotions she'd been holding back finally breaking free. She cried silently, tears of relief, fear, and uncertainty flowing freely. The chains were gone, but she was still far from home in a strange town with few options. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next morning, Rebecca woke to sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was, then reality crashed back. She sat up slowly, taking stock of her situation. Her wrists were still sore, but the angry redness had begun to fade. A soft knock at the door roused her further. "Miss Vaughn, I've brought some hot water for washing and a dress that might fit you," Mrs. Hollister called. Rebecca opened the door to find the kind-faced woman holding a steaming pitcher and a folded blue dress. "This belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to Chicago," Mrs. Hollister explained. "I thought you might appreciate something clean to wear." "You're very kind," Rebecca said, accepting the offerings gratefully. "Breakfast is ready whenever you are," Mrs. Hollister added, "and Mr. Oldham stopped by earlier. He said he'd return at noon if you're feeling up to visitors." After the older woman left, Rebecca washed as best she could with the pitcher of water and small basin, relishing the feeling of cleanliness. The borrowed dress was a simple cotton garment, a bit loose in the waist but otherwise a reasonable fit. She managed to tame her hair into a neat braid, and with clean clothes and a washed face, she felt more herself than she had in days. Downstairs, the dining room was empty except for an elderly man reading a newspaper. Mrs. Hollister appeared from the kitchen with a plate of eggs, bacon, and toast, along with a cup of coffee. "Eat up, dear. You look like you could use a good meal," she said, setting the food before Rebecca. Rebecca hadn't realized how hungry she was until the aroma of the food reached her. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm as her empty stomach demanded more. "Mrs. Hollister," she said when she'd finished, "do you know Mr. Oldham well?" The older woman sat down across from her with her own cup of coffee. "Known him since he arrived here 8 years ago. Came with nothing but determination and bought that ranch when nobody thought it would amount to much. Proved them all wrong." And what kind of man is he? Rebecca asked cautiously. Mrs. Hollister seemed to consider her words carefully. Nathan Oldham is a man of his word. Hardworking, honest to a fault, keeps to himself mostly, but he's always the first to help when someone's in trouble. She paused, studying Rebecca. He's not the type to order a bride in chains, if that's what you're asking. Rebecca nodded slowly. I believe that now. But I still don't understand why he would advertise for a mail-order bride. Loneliness, I expect, Mrs. Hollister said simply. It's a hard life, ranching, and good women are scarce out here. Most men in his position would have taken what they paid for chains or no. She reached across the table to pat Rebecca's hand. Whatever you decide to do, you landed in a better situation than it might have been. At noon precisely, Nathan Oldham returned to the boarding house. He'd exchanged his dusty work clothes for a clean shirt and had clearly made an effort to be presentable, though he still looked distinctly uncomfortable in the parlor's dainty furniture. He stood when Rebecca entered the room, removing his hat. Miss Vaughn, you're looking better today. I feel better, thank you, she replied, taking a seat across from him. In the clear light of day, she could see him properly for the first time. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, with strong features and those striking blue eyes that seemed to see more than she was comfortable revealing. I've been thinking about your situation, Nathan said, getting straight to the point. I spoke with Sheriff Wilson this morning, if you want to press charges against your uncle for theft and… He hesitated, clearly searching for the right word. Involuntary transport, he can send a telegraph to the authorities in Boston. Rebecca considered this. My uncle has friends in Boston law enforcement. I doubt it would come to anything. Nathan nodded as if he'd expected this answer. Then we need to consider your options here. Mr. Oldham, Rebecca said carefully, I appreciate what you've done for me, but I don't want your charity. It's not charity to right a wrong, he replied firmly, but I understand your pride. Galesburg has opportunities if you're willing to work. The school needs a teacher's assistant, and I know Mrs. Fuller at the general store was looking for help. Rebecca straightened her spine. I'm educated, Mr. Oldham. I can read, write, and do figures. Before my parents died, I was preparing to attend college. Something like respect flickered in Nathan's eyes. That's good to know. The teacher's position might suit you then. He hesitated before continuing. There's another option, of course. Rebecca tensed. What's that? The original agreement. Marriage. He held up a hand when she began to protest. Hear me out. It wouldn't be what your uncle arranged. It would be a business proposition, plain and simple. Business. Rebecca repeated skeptically. I need a wife to help run the household and eventually raise a family. You need security and a place to stay. We could start with a contract for 6 months. If at the end of that time you're unhappy, I'll pay for your passage to wherever you want to go, Chicago, New York, even back to Boston if that's your wish. Rebecca stared at him, searching for the trap in his words. And if I refuse? Then I'll still pay for your 2 weeks here as promised, and you can pursue the teaching position or whatever else you choose. This isn't an ultimatum, Miss Vaughn. It's an offer. Why would you make such an offer to a complete stranger? Nathan was silent for a moment, his gaze dropping to his hat, which he turned slowly in his hands. Because I've been trying to make this ranch work for 8 years. I've built something good, something that could last generations, but a ranch isn't just land and cattle, it's a home. And I've come to realize I don't want to build that alone. His honesty caught her off guard. You could find another willing bride, one who chose this life. I could, he acknowledged, but something tells me you might be worth the wait. He stood up, placing his hat back on his head. Think about it. No need to decide today. I'll return in a few days for your answer. After he left, Rebecca remained in the parlor, turning his offer over in her mind. A business arrangement, 6 months to prove compatibility with an escape clause if it didn't work out. It was far more reasonable than she'd expected. Over the next few days, Rebecca explored Galesburg, getting a feel for the frontier town that might become her home. She visited the school and met with the headmaster, who seemed impressed with her education but could offer only a meager salary. The general store had already filled its position. Other opportunities were limited for a single woman with no family connections. She also learned more about Nathan Oldham from casual conversations around town. The banker spoke highly of his business sense. The blacksmith described how Nathan had stayed up 3 nights straight helping him when his wife was ill with fever last winter. Several townspeople mentioned his fair dealings and willingness to extend credit during hard times. No one had a bad word to say about him, which made Rebecca suspicious at first. But as the pattern continued, she began to believe that perhaps Nathan Oldham was exactly what he appeared to be, a good man who had made an honest offer. On the 4th day, as promised, Nathan returned to the boarding house. They sat in the same parlor, the afternoon light casting long shadows across the floor. "I've been thinking about your proposal," Rebecca began, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. "And I have some conditions of my own." Nathan's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded for her to continue. "If we enter this arrangement, I want it clear that I'll be a partner, not a servant. I'll do my share of the work, but I expect to have a say in decisions that affect us both." "That seems fair," Nathan agreed. "I also want to continue my education in whatever way possible. If there are books or newspapers available, I want access to them. My grandfather left me a small library. It's yours to use as you wish." Rebecca took a deep breath before stating her final condition. "And I want a real marriage, not just in name, but I need time. I won't share your bed immediately. I need to know you better first." A flush crept up Nathan's neck, but his gaze remained steady. "I would never force such things, Miss Vaughn. If that happens between us, it will be because we both desire it." Rebecca nodded, relieved by his response. "Then I accept your proposal, Mr. Oldham. 6 months to see if we suit." Nathan extended his hand and she placed hers in it, feeling the same calloused strength she'd noticed that first day. "Then it's agreed. We can be married by Justice Parker tomorrow if that suits you." "So soon, unless you need more time," Rebecca considered this. Delay would only prolong her uncertainty. "No, tomorrow is fine." The wedding was a simple affair at the Justice of the Peace's office the following afternoon. Rebecca wore the blue dress Mrs. Hollister had given her, with a borrowed cameo at the throat. Nathan appeared in a clean black suit that looked as though it hadn't been worn in years. Mrs. Hollister and the elderly boarder served as witnesses. The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. When Justice Parker pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan hesitated only briefly before leaning down to place a chaste kiss on Rebecca's cheek. His lips were warm and slightly rough, and the contact sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. "Mrs. Oldham," he said quietly, testing the sound of her new name. "Mr. Oldham," she replied with equal formality, though something in his eyes made her add, "Nathan." A smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Rebecca." The ranch was a 5-mile ride from town. Nathan helped Rebecca into the wagon beside him, her small trunk loaded in the back alongside supplies he'd purchased from the general store. As they left Galesburg behind, the prairie opened up before them, golden grasses swaying in the late summer breeze. In the distance, Rebecca could see rolling hills and patches of trees marking the path of a creek. "It's beautiful," she said, surprising herself with the sincerity in her voice. "Wait until you see it at sunrise," Nathan replied, a note of pride evident. "The whole world seems to catch fire." They traveled in companionable silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses' hooves a soothing backdrop to Rebecca's thoughts. This morning she had been Miss Rebecca Vaughn, mail-order bride and near prisoner. Now she was Mrs. Rebecca Oldham, ranch wife, embarking on a 6-month trial marriage to a man she barely knew. "Tell me about your ranch," she said finally, wanting to break the silence. Nathan's expression lightened as he began to speak. He described the operation with obvious passion: 200 head of cattle, 20 horses, 100 acres of good grazing land with water rights to Spring Creek. He'd built the main house himself, along with a barn and bunkhouse for the 2 hands he employed full-time. "It's still growing," he admitted. "Not as big as some of the spreads further west, but it's mine. Every board, every beast, every acre. You built all this in 8 years." Rebecca couldn't hide her impression. "Had a bit of luck," Nathan acknowledged. "First cattle drive, I managed to get my herd to Chicago when prices were high. Reinvested everything. Been building steadily since." As they crested a small rise, the ranch came into view. The main house was a substantial two-story structure of hewn logs with a covered porch wrapping around the front. A large red barn stood nearby, with corrals and outbuildings arranged in a practical pattern. A bunkhouse sat a short distance away, smoke rising from its chimney. "Home," Nathan said simply, guiding the wagon toward the house. As they approached, a tall, lanky man emerged from the barn, followed by a stockier figure. Nathan raised his hand in greeting. "That's Hank Miller and Tom Jenkins," he explained. "Good men. Hank's been with me almost from the start." Tom joined last spring. The men nodded respectfully to Rebecca as Nathan helped her down from the wagon. "Madam," they said in near unison, both looking somewhat awed by the presence of a woman. "This is my wife, Rebecca," Nathan said, the words still awkward on his tongue. "Pleased to meet you both," Rebecca replied, trying to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel. After the brief introductions, Nathan led Rebecca up the porch steps and through the front door. The interior of the house was surprisingly spacious, with a large central room containing a sturdy table, several chairs, and a stone fireplace. Off to one side was a kitchen area with a wood-burning stove and shelves stocked with provisions. "Bedrooms are upstairs," Nathan explained. "3 of them, though only one's furnished properly. That'll be yours. I've been using the small room at the back, but I can fix it up better now that." He trailed off, seeming unsure how to finish the thought, "now that you have a wife." Rebecca supplied, unable to suppress a small smile at his discomfort. Nathan cleared his throat. "Yes, well, I'll bring your trunk up. Feel free to look around." Left alone, Rebecca explored the main floor of what was now her home. Despite the practical, masculine furnishings, the house was clean and well-maintained. The kitchen was organized logically, with good-quality cookware hanging from hooks. A door led to a small pantry well-stocked with preserved foods. What surprised her most was the bookshelf in the corner of the main room. True to Nathan's word, it held several dozen volumes, ranging from practical manuals on animal husbandry and agriculture to novels by Dickens, Melville, and even a volume of Shakespeare. She was examining these when Nathan returned from taking her trunk upstairs. "My grandfather was a schoolteacher before he took up farming," he explained, noticing her interest. "Those were his. Said a man's mind needs feeding as much as his body." "He sounds like a wise man," Rebecca said, running her fingers along the spines of the books. "He taught me my letters when my father thought it was a waste of time." Nathan stepped closer, selecting a volume and handing it to her. This was his favorite, Wordsworth's poems. Rebecca accepted the book, opening it carefully to find a neat inscription on the flyleaf. "To my grandson Nathan, may you find beauty in both words and world. Grandfather Henry, 1856. "It's a treasure," she said softly. Nathan nodded, a flash of vulnerability crossing his features. "One of the few things I brought west with me." He seemed about to say more, but instead turned toward the kitchen. "You must be hungry after the journey. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage bacon and eggs." "Let me," Rebecca offered. "I may as well start learning my way around the kitchen." They worked side by side, preparing a simple meal, establishing a tentative rhythm as they navigated the unfamiliar territory of their new relationship. Rebecca found herself relaxing slightly as they fell into practical tasks. The first night, true to his word, Nathan showed Rebecca to the main bedroom upstairs, a large room with a 4-poster bed, a chest of drawers, and a small writing desk beneath the window. Her trunk had been placed at the foot of the bed. "I changed the linens this morning," he said awkwardly, hovering in the doorway. "Bathroom's just down the hall. There's a pump outside for water, but I filled the reservoir for morning." "Thank you," Rebecca said, suddenly very aware of the intimacy of the moment. "Where will you sleep?" "I fixed up the back room for myself," Nathan replied. "It's small but comfortable enough." A moment of silence stretched between them, laden with unspoken thoughts. "Well," Nathan finally said, "good night, Rebecca. Sleep well." "Good night, Nathan." After he left, closing the door behind him, Rebecca sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. She was married. She was a rancher's wife. She was hundreds of miles from everything she had known, and yet, for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. Nathan Oldham was not the husband she had imagined for herself, but he had shown her nothing but respect and consideration. Perhaps, in time, they might build something real from this strange beginning. The first week passed in a blur of adjustment and learning. Rebecca threw herself into understanding the workings of the ranch house, determined to prove her worth. Nathan showed her the basics of the kitchen equipment, the laundry facilities, and where supplies were stored, then left her to establish her own systems. To her surprise, Rebecca found satisfaction in bringing order to the household. The kitchen was reorganized, linens were laundered and properly stored, and meals became more varied as she experimented with the available ingredients. Nathan, for his part, maintained a respectful distance. He was unfailingly polite, consulting her on household decisions and explaining the ranch operations when she expressed interest. In the evenings, they often sat in the main room, Rebecca reading or sewing while Nathan worked on account books or maintenance tasks. Conversation came slowly at first, but gradually they began to share fragments of their pasts. Rebecca learned that Nathan had grown up on a small farm in Ohio, the second of 5 children. His parents had disapproved of his decision to head west, preferring that he stay and help with the family land. "But I wanted something that was mine," he explained one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Something I built, not inherited." "That's understandable," Rebecca said, thinking of her own lost inheritance. "To create something of your own." Nathan glanced at her. "What about you? What did you dream of before?" He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable referencing the circumstances that had brought her to Illinois. Rebecca considered deflecting the question but decided on honesty instead. "I wanted to teach. My parents encouraged education for both my brother and me. When they died, my brother was already at university, but I was still at home." "You have a brother?" Nathan asked, surprised. "Does he know what your uncle did?" "William died 2 years ago in a boating accident. After that, it was just me and Uncle George. When my inheritance was gone, he saw me as nothing but a burden." Rebecca's voice grew bitter. "Until he realized I could be traded to settle a debt." Nathan's hand covered hers briefly. "I'm sorry for what happened to you, Rebecca, but I promise you'll never be treated that way here." The simple contact of his hand on hers sent an unexpected warmth through Rebecca. When he pulled away, she found herself missing the connection. As the weeks passed, Rebecca settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose early with Nathan, preparing breakfast before he went out to work with the cattle. The days were filled with household tasks, gardening in the small plot behind the house, and learning to bake bread in the temperamental oven. In the afternoons, she often walked down to the creek that ran through the property, finding peace in the solitude and natural beauty. Sometimes she brought a book, sitting beneath a cottonwood tree to read while meadowlarks sang in the tall grass. It was during one of these peaceful afternoons, about a month after her arrival, that she heard the sound of hooves approaching. Looking up, she saw Nathan riding toward her on his chestnut gelding. He dismounted smoothly, letting the horse drink from the creek as he approached her. "Thought I might find you here," he said, removing his hat. His hair was damp with sweat from working in the afternoon sun, and his shirt clung to his broad shoulders. Rebecca found herself noticing the strong lines of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he looked at her. He had become handsome to her somehow in these weeks of quiet coexistence. "It's peaceful," she said, making room for him on the grassy bank. "A good place to think." Nathan sat beside her, stretching his long legs out before him. "And what are you thinking about today, Mrs. Oldham?" The question was light, but Rebecca sensed genuine interest behind it. "I was thinking that I'm happy here," she admitted, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Happier than I expected to be." Nathan's expression softened. "I'm glad to hear that. Are you happy, Nathan, with our arrangement?" He considered the question seriously before answering. "I am. You've brought life back to the house, made it a home again." He hesitated before adding, "And I enjoy your company." Rebecca felt a flush of pleasure at his words. "I enjoy yours as well." Something shifted between them in that moment, a subtle change in the air. Nathan's gaze dropped briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. For an instant, Rebecca thought he might lean forward to kiss her, and she realized with a jolt that she wanted him to. Instead, he cleared his throat and stood, offering her his hand. We should head back. Storm's coming. Looking up, Rebecca saw dark clouds gathering on the horizon. She placed her hand in Nathan's, allowing him to help her to her feet. This time, he didn't immediately let go, and they stood for a moment, connected by that simple touch, before walking back toward the house together. That evening, the storm broke with spectacular force. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rumbled across the plains. Rebecca stood at the kitchen window, watching lightning illuminate the yard in brilliant flashes. Nathan entered, carrying firewood for the stove. Going to be a long night, he observed, piling the logs in the wood box. Creek might overflow if this keeps up. Is that dangerous? Rebecca asked, concerned. Not for the house, we're on high enough ground, but I'll need to check the lower pastures in the morning, make sure none of the cattle are stranded. As he spoke, a particularly violent thunderclap shook the house, making Rebecca jump. Without thinking, she reached for Nathan, her hand catching his arm. He stilled, looking down at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I'm sorry," she said, starting to withdraw her hand. "I didn't mean to." Nathan covered her hand with his own, keeping it against his arm. "Don't apologize, I'm here." The simple statement carried more weight than its words alone. I'm here. Present, solid, reliable. Rebecca had been alone for so long, carrying her burdens by herself, that the offer of support, even in something as small as fear of a storm, touched her deeply. "Nathan," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. Before she could continue, a tremendous crack split the air, followed by a crashing sound from outside. Nathan was at the window instantly. "Lightning hit the old oak by the corral," he said, already reaching for his coat. "I need to check on the horses." "I'll come with you," Rebecca said, grabbing her shawl. Nathan looked ready to argue but nodded instead. "Stay close." They rushed out into the downpour, making their way to the barn by the intermittent flashes of lightning. The old oak had indeed been struck, a large branch now lying across part of the corral fence. The horses were nervous but unharmed, whinnying anxiously in their stalls. Rebecca helped Nathan calm them, moving from stall to stall with soothing words and gentle pats. She'd grown comfortable with the animals over the past month, losing her initial city-bred wariness. "You're good with them," Nathan observed as they worked. "They trust you." "Animals are often better judges of character than people," Rebecca replied, stroking the nose of a dappled mare. They stayed in the barn until all the horses were settled, then made a dash back to the house through the continuing downpour. By the time they reached the porch, they were both soaked to the skin. Inside, Nathan built up the fire while Rebecca fetched towels. As she handed him one, their fingers brushed, and that same awareness flickered between them. Nathan's wet shirt clung to his chest, outlining the strong muscles beneath, and Rebecca found herself unable to look away. "You should change into dry clothes," Nathan said, his voice lower than usual. "Before you catch cold." Rebecca nodded, suddenly very conscious of how her own wet dress must look. "Yes, so should you." Upstairs, she peeled off the sodden garments with trembling fingers, toweling her damp hair and changing into her warmest nightgown and robe. When she returned downstairs, Nathan had also changed, wearing dry trousers and a clean flannel shirt, his hair still damp and slightly tousled. He had prepared hot tea, setting 2 steaming cups on the table. Thought this might help ward off any chill. "Thank you," Rebecca said, taking a seat across from him and wrapping her hands around the warm cup. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the storm gradually move off into the distance. Rebecca found herself studying Nathan's face in the firelight, the straight nose, the firm mouth that rarely smiled but when it did transformed his entire countenance. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly, catching her gaze. Rebecca considered deflecting but chose honesty instead. "I was thinking that you're not what I expected when I first arrived. Is that good or bad?" "Good," she said without hesitation. "Very good." Nathan's expression grew serious. "Rebecca, I want you to know that I'm content with how things are between us. I'm not expecting anything more from you than what you're ready to give." His consideration touched her deeply. "And what if I find myself ready to give more than I initially thought?" she asked, her heart pounding at her own boldness. The flicker of surprise and heat in Nathan's eyes sent a thrill through her. "Then I would be honored," he said quietly, But only when you're certain. Rebecca nodded, understanding the respect behind his words. They finished their tea in silence charged with new awareness, before saying goodnight and retiring to their separate rooms. In the weeks that followed, something subtle but significant had changed between them. There were lingering glances, casual touches that seemed to carry more meaning, conversations that stretched late into the evening. Rebecca found herself thinking of Nathan during the day, looking forward to his return from the fields, enjoying the quiet moments they shared. Autumn arrived, painting the prairie in golden hues. The cattle drive to the railhead in Chicago was approaching, and Nathan was busy with preparations. He would be gone for nearly 2 weeks, their first separation since Rebecca's arrival. The night before his departure, Rebecca prepared a special dinner, using preserved fruits from the pantry to make a pie Nathan had mentioned his mother used to bake. His pleasure at the gesture was evident. "This reminds me of home," he said, savoring the dessert. "How did you know?" "You mentioned it once," Rebecca replied, pleased that she'd remembered correctly. "I thought it might be nice before your journey." After dinner, they sat on the porch despite the growing chill in the evening air. The stars were emerging in the darkening sky, countless pinpricks of light stretching from horizon to horizon. "Will you be all right here alone?" Nathan asked. "Hank will stay behind to help with anything you need, but I don't like leaving you." "I'll be fine," Rebecca assured him. "The house won't fall apart in 2 weeks." Nathan smiled, one of his rare full smiles that transformed his face. "It's not the house I'm worried about." The simple statement revealed more than perhaps he'd intended. Rebecca turned to look at him directly. "You're concerned for me." "Of course I am," Nathan said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You're my wife." "On paper," Rebecca reminded him gently. For a 6-month trial, Nathan's expression grew serious. "Rebecca, I think we both know it's become more than that." Her heart quickened at his words. "Has it?" In answer, Nathan reached out to touch her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle against her skin. "You know it has, at least for me." Rebecca leaned into his touch, allowing herself to acknowledge the feelings that had been growing within her. "For me too," she whispered. Nathan's eyes darkened as he leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Rebecca closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a tentative kiss. The contact was brief, but ignited something within her. When they parted, Nathan's expression was one of wonder and desire. This time when he kissed her, it was deeper, his hand sliding to cradle the back of her neck, drawing her closer. Rebecca responded with a passion that surprised them both, her hands moving to his shoulders, feeling the solid strength beneath her fingers. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing heavily. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," Nathan admitted, his voice rough. "Why didn't you?" Rebecca asked, her hands still resting on his shoulders. "I needed you to be sure, to choose it freely." The reference to how she'd arrived in chains without choice wasn't lost on Rebecca. "I'm choosing now," she said softly, rising from her chair. She held out her hand to him. "Come inside, Nathan." He looked at her outstretched hand, then at her face, searching for any sign of hesitation. Finding none, he stood and took her hand, following her into the house and up the stairs to what had been her bedroom alone until now. At the threshold, he paused. "Rebecca, are you certain?" In answer, she stepped into his arms, drawing him into another kiss that left no doubt about her desires. That night, their marriage became real in every sense, a joining of bodies that had already begun to join in mind and heart. Later, lying in the darkness with Nathan's arm around her, Rebecca felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. This wasn't the life she had planned for herself, but somehow it had become exactly the life she wanted. "What are you thinking?" Nathan murmured, his breath warm against her hair. "That sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead to the best destinations," she replied, nestling closer to him. He tightened his arm around her. "Even when they start with chains." "Especially then," Rebecca said, thinking of how far she had come from that frightened, angry woman who had arrived in Galesburg. "Because it makes the freedom all the sweeter." The cattle drive to Chicago was a success, bringing a substantial profit that Nathan immediately began reinvesting in the ranch. Upon his return, he found Rebecca had made further improvements to the house. including curtains for the windows and new cushions for the hard wooden chairs. "Feels even more like home now," he said approvingly, taking in the changes. But the most significant change was in their relationship. The tentative courtship had blossomed into genuine affection and deepening love. They worked as partners during the day and shared their bed at night, learning each other's bodies, minds, and hearts. As winter approached, Nathan began construction on a project he'd been planning secretly in addition to the house that would serve as a library and sitting room for Rebecca. When he finally showed her the framed walls, her eyes filled with tears. "You did this for me?" she asked, touching the lumber reverently. "You said education was important to you," Nathan replied. "I thought you should have a proper place for those books, and maybe someday for teaching our own children to read." The mention of children was new, a future they had begun to imagine together. Rebecca's heart swelled at the thought, at how naturally it came to envision raising a family with this man who had freed her in more ways than one. The first snow came in early December, blanketing the prairie in white. Rebecca stood at the window watching it fall, marveling at the beauty of the transformed landscape. Nathan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "First winter on the ranch," he observed, resting his chin on her shoulder. "They can be harsh out here." "But we'll be warm enough," she replied, leaning back against his chest. That evening, as they sat before the fire, Rebecca realized that their 6-month agreement was nearing its end. Only 2 months remained of the trial period Nathan had proposed. The thought of leaving had become unthinkable. "Nathan," she said, setting aside her sewing, "do you remember our agreement? The 6-month trial?" He looked up from the bridle he was repairing, a flicker of concern crossing his features. "I remember. February will mark 6 months." "I don't want to wait until February to decide," Rebecca said firmly. Nathan set the bridle aside, giving her his full attention. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I don't need any more time to know that this is where I belong. With you. If you'll have me, not as a trial wife, but as your true wife. Forever." The worry in Nathan's eyes gave way to profound relief and joy. "Rebecca, I've known since that night by the creek that you were the one I wanted to spend my life with. I just didn't want to pressure you." "No pressure," she assured him, moving to kneel beside his chair. "Only love. I love you, Nathan Oldham." He gathered her into his arms, pulling her onto his lap. "And I love you, Rebecca Oldham, more than I ever thought possible." Their kiss sealed a promise that had begun the moment he broke her chains and spoke those first liberating words. "You're free now." Winter passed in a contented rhythm of work and togetherness. The library addition was completed before the worst of the weather set in, and Rebecca spent many happy hours arranging the books and planning how to use the space. Nathan surprised her with a small piano purchased in Chicago during the cattle drive, remembering a chance comment she'd made about playing as a girl in the evenings. Music now filled the ranch house, Rebecca's voice and the piano's notes blending with the howl of the prairie wind outside. Nathan often sat listening, a look of contentment on his face that made Rebecca's heart full. "I never imagined having this," he confessed one night as they lay together in the darkness. "Music, books, a wife who makes everything brighter. I thought the ranch would be enough. And now?" Rebecca prompted, tracing the line of his jaw with her finger. "Now I know it was just the beginning, the foundation for something much more important." Spring arrived with its promise of renewal, bringing with it the birth of new calves and the first green shoots in Rebecca's expanded garden. It also brought news that changed their lives forever. "Nathan," Rebecca said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, "I have something to tell you." He turned to her, catching something in her tone. "What is it?" "I'm going to have a baby," she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "In autumn." For a moment, Nathan sat frozen, processing her words. Then he was on his knees before her chair, his hands gently cradling her still flat stomach. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Rebecca asked, though the joy radiating from his face had already answered her question. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," he said, gathering her into a careful embrace. "You've given me everything, Rebecca, everything that matters." As the months passed, Rebecca's body changed, her stomach rounding with the new life growing within. Nathan treated her with tender concern, insisting she rest when she tried to do too much, enlisting Mrs. Hollister from town to help with the heavier household tasks. In June, a letter arrived from Boston. Rebecca recognized her uncle's handwriting and felt a moment of fear before steeling herself to open it. Inside was a terse note informing her that he had learned of her fortuitous marriage and requesting financial assistance for his instrumental role in arranging it. Nathan found her sitting at the kitchen table, the letter crumpled in her fist, tears of anger on her cheeks. "What is it?" he asked, immediately concerned. "Is it the baby?" "No," she assured him quickly. "It's my uncle. He wants money for his services in sending me here." Nathan's expression darkened as he read the letter. "He has some nerve after what he did to you. What should we do?" Rebecca asked, conflicted. Despite everything, George Vaughn was her only living relative. Nathan considered the question carefully before answering. "That's for you to decide. But remember that you don't owe him anything. He sold you, Rebecca. He didn't arrange a marriage, he traded you like property." Rebecca nodded slowly, coming to a decision. "I'll write to him. Not to send money, but to tell him that I've found happiness despite his cruelty, and that our child will never know him as family." Nathan knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Are you sure? He is your blood." "You're my family now," Rebecca said firmly. "You and our child, blood ties aren't what make a family love, respect, and choice do." She squeezed his hands. "You taught me that when you broke those chains and gave me the freedom to choose." The letter to George Vaughn was sent the next day. Rebecca felt a sense of closure as she watched the mail coach pull away, carrying her final words to the uncle who had betrayed her trust. She was no longer defined by what had been done to her, but by the life she had chosen and built with Nathan. As summer turned to fall, the ranch prospered. Nathan hired another hand to help with the increasing workload, planning ahead for the time when the baby would arrive. The library addition had been furnished with a comfortable rocking chair where Rebecca often sat reading, one hand resting on her growing belly. In late September, as the leaves were beginning to turn, Rebecca went into labor. Nathan sent one of the hands racing for the midwife in town while he stayed by Rebecca's side, his face pale with concern but his voice steady as he encouraged her through the early pains. Mrs. Hollister and the midwife arrived just as the labor intensified. They shooed Nathan from the bedroom with firm instructions to boil water and prepare clean linens. He did as told, then paced the main room below, flinching at each cry from upstairs. After 14 hours of labor, just as dawn was breaking over the prairie, the cry of a newborn filled the ranch house. Nathan froze in his pacing, his heart pounding as he stared at the staircase, waiting. Mrs. Hollister appeared at the top of the stairs, her round face wreathed in smiles. "Congratulations, Mr. Oldham, you have a son." Nathan took the stairs 2 at a time, bursting into the bedroom where Rebecca lay propped against the pillows, a tiny bundle in her arms. Her face was pale and drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes shone with a joy that took his breath away. "Nathan," she said softly, "come meet your son." He approached the bed on unsteady legs, sitting carefully beside her. Rebecca tilted the bundle so he could see the tiny red face of their child. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he opened them briefly, eyes of clear blue. "He looks like you," Rebecca whispered. With trembling fingers, Nathan reached out to touch his son's cheek. The skin was impossibly soft, the tiny features perfect. A wave of love unlike anything he had ever known washed over him. "What shall we name him?" Rebecca asked. Nathan thought for a moment. "William," he suggested, remembering her brother. "William Henry Oldham." Tears filled Rebecca's eyes. "William Henry, it's perfect." As the midwife and Mrs. Hollister quietly left the room, Nathan stretched out beside Rebecca on the bed, one arm around her shoulders, the other hand gently touching their son's tiny fingers. The three of them, a family created against all odds, bound together by love rather than obligation. "Thank you," Nathan murmured against Rebecca's hair. "For what?" she asked, leaning into his embrace. "For staying, for choosing this life with me, for our son." His voice caught with emotion. "When you arrived in those chains, I never imagined we would end up here." Rebecca turned her face up to his. When you broke them and told me I was free, you gave me a gift I never expected: the freedom to find love. Real love. Nathan kissed her softly, mindful of her exhaustion. And I found my home, he said. Not just this ranch, but here with you. Outside, the sun rose fully over the prairie, casting golden light through the bedroom window. William Henry Oldham slept peacefully in his mother's arms, while his father kept watch over them both. The future stretched before them, full of promise and possibility, a future built on freedom, choice, and love that had begun the moment a mail-order bride arrived in chains, and a cowboy broke them with the words that changed everything. You're free now. 5 years passed, bringing growth and change to the Oldham ranch. William Henry, now a sturdy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's quick mind, had been joined by a sister, Emma Grace, whose arrival 2 years earlier had completed their family circle. The ranch had prospered, expanding to include more land, more cattle, and a reputation for fair dealing that brought buyers from as far as Chicago. The library addition had been joined by other improvements: a larger kitchen, a proper bathroom with indoor plumbing, and a small schoolroom where Rebecca taught not only her own children, but also those of the ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders. On a crisp autumn day, as the family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset, a tradition they had maintained through the years, Rebecca looked at the life she had built with Nathan and felt a deep contentment. William was showing his little sister how to whittle a stick with the small knife Nathan had given him for his birthday, while Nathan himself sat in the rocking chair, his expression peaceful as he watched his children. Do you ever think about that first day? Rebecca asked softly, taking a seat beside him. When I arrived in Galesburg, Nathan reached for her hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after years together. Sometimes, mostly I think about how lucky I am that you stayed. Not luck, Rebecca corrected gently. Choice on both our parts. He nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. The best choice I ever made was breaking those chains. Rebecca squeezed his hand, thinking of all they had shared since that day: joy and sorrow, hard work and sweet rewards, the daily acts of love that had forged their bond into something unbreakable. And the best choice I ever made was believing in the freedom you offered, she replied. Not just freedom from chains, but the freedom to love and be loved. As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the prairie sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, Nathan pulled Rebecca closer to his side. Their children's laughter mingled with the evening sounds of the ranch horses in the corral, cattle in the distant pastures, the whisper of wind through prairie grass. This was their legacy. Nathan thought with pride not just the land and livestock, but the home they had created together. A home built on respect and choice, on freedom and love. A far cry from the harsh beginning that had brought a mail-order bride in chains to a dusty street in Galesburg, Illinois. I love you, Rebecca Oldham, he said simply, the words carrying the weight of years of shared life. And I love you, Nathan Oldham, she replied, resting her head on his shoulder as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the prairie sky. Now and always. In the years that followed, the story of how they met became a family legend, told and retold around the fireplace on winter evenings. But what Rebecca cherished most wasn't the dramatic beginning, the chains, the rescue, the uncertainty, but the 1,000 quiet moments that had come after. The daily choice to love, to work together, to build something lasting from an unlikely beginning. Because in the end, the true measure of freedom wasn't the breaking of physical chains, but the building of a life where love was freely given and freely returned, a lesson they passed on to their children, and their children's children, long after the memory of those iron shackles had faded into the rich tapestry of their shared history.